She wasn't a threat. She wasn't breaking the law. She was simply walking back to her own home. Yet in seconds, everything changed. A so-called security guard from the HOA decided she didn't belong, and what he did next crossed a line no one expected. A gun, pointed at an innocent black woman. But what he didn't know was that she wasn't just a bystander. She carried a power he could never imagine. This encounter wouldn't end the way he thought. The question is, will you ever look at security the same way again? It was supposed to be an ordinary evening. After a long day of work, she parked her car just a few blocks from her home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. The kind of place where people waved to their neighbors, where kids played on trimmed lawns, and where safety was supposed to be a given. She carried herself with calm confidence, dressed in casual clothes, blending in like anyone else returning home. But to some, that was never enough. As she walked down the sidewalk, the familiar sight of streetlights glowing against neat rows of houses should have felt comforting. Instead, she noticed something unsettling, a figure in a dark uniform watching her from a distance. The HOA security, meant to protect the neighborhood, seemed to fix his eyes on her with suspicion. She had lived here long enough to know the unspoken rules, the quiet tension that followed her presence. But on this night, that tension was about to erupt. His posture shifted, his hand brushing against his belt in a way that made her instinct sharpen. She wasn't just a resident in this community. She was about to become the center of a confrontation she never asked for. And what neither he, nor anyone else around, realized was that she wasn't just another woman walking home. The quiet air of the neighborhood seemed to shift as the security guard's suspicion hardened into action. He began to follow her, his footsteps heavy on the pavement. What started as a walk home was turning into something far more dangerous. She could feel the weight of his stare pressing into her back, each step pulling her closer to a confrontation she hadn't invited. The guard quickened his pace, closing the distance. His hand hovered near his hip, close enough to the holster strapped there. To him, she wasn't a neighbor, not a homeowner, not even a woman returning home after a long day. She was a target. In his eyes, her presence was justification enough. She paused briefly at the gate leading into her property, keys in hand, but the sharp command cut through the air. "Hey, stop right there." His voice wasn't a request. It was an order drenched in accusation. She turned slowly, her calm expression met with the hardened glare. The man's hand was now firmly gripping his weapon. In that moment, the world seemed to shrink. The glow of porch lights, the quiet hum of crickets, the faint laughter of children in nearby homes, it all faded into the background. What remained was the chilling reality that she, an innocent woman in her own neighborhood, was standing at gunpoint by someone sworn to protect. The neighbors began to notice. Curtains shifted, doors creaked open, and soon, eyes were watching from the safety of their homes. Whispers filled the night air, but no one stepped forward. They watched as fear and authority collided on their street. Her heart pounded, but she refused to let fear dictate her stance. She knew too well how quickly these moments could spiral into tragedy. She had studied them, trained for them, prepared for the worst outcomes most people could never imagine. But here, in her own neighborhood, that training was the only thing standing between calm and chaos. And the guard, unaware of the storm he was about to unleash, tightened his grip on the gun, convinced that intimidation alone would make her submit. He didn't know who she was. He didn't know what she carried with her. And he had no idea that this night, his actions were about to turn his world upside down. The silence shattered with the sound of the gun's safety clicking off. The guard had crossed the line, weapon fully drawn, aimed directly at her chest. His eyes burned with suspicion, his voice booming. "Don't move." For a split second, time froze. Her mind replayed every headline she had ever read, every name etched into the long list of those who didn't survive encounters like this. She knew this moment could end the same way. One twitch of his finger, one misjudged breath, and her story would never be told. But what he didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was who he was pointing his weapon at. Beneath her calm, steady gaze was years of tactical training, discipline, and a badge that carried more authority than his entire HOA security force combined. She was no ordinary woman. She was an FBI tactical commander, trained to face down armed threats far greater than him. Her posture remained unshaken. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hands, not in surrender, but in measured control. Every motion calculated, every breath steady. The guard's confidence faltered for the first time, uncertainty flickering in his eyes as he realized she wasn't responding with fear. Neighbors recorded with their phones, gasps echoing across the street as the standoff escalated. The weight of his mistake was growing, but he pushed it down, his pride too heavy to let go. And then, in a voice sharp enough to cut through the tension, she spoke, not to plead, not to beg, but with the authority of someone who had commanded federal agents in life-or-death missions. Her words struck like thunder, calm, precise, impossible to ignore. In that instant, the roles reversed. The guard's arrogance cracked. His hand trembled on the weapon, his certainty crumbling under the realization of who stood before him. The neighborhood wasn't watching a helpless victim anymore. They were witnessing the moment power shifted, and the truth of his reckless decision was about to come crashing down. The silence broke with the sound of retreating footsteps. The guard's hand shook as he lowered the weapon, the weight of his actions pressing heavier than the gun itself. Whispers rippled through the crowd, neighbors, witnesses, cameras capturing every second. What was meant to be intimidation had spiraled into humiliation, and now the truth was undeniable. She stood unwavering, her presence commanding the space more powerfully than any weapon could. In that moment, she wasn't just a black woman facing down prejudice. She was a living reminder that authority, dignity, and strength cannot be stripped away by bias or fear. With a calm steadiness, she revealed her badge. The silence deepened into collective shock. Gasps turned to murmurs, and the guard's pride dissolved into visible dread. This was no ordinary resident he had targeted. This was an FBI tactical commander, someone who had dedicated her life to protecting the nation, now forced to defend herself against the very prejudice she had sworn to fight. For the guard, there was no escape. His arrogance had been unmasked, his actions recorded, his future sealed by his own reckless decision. But for her, the impact ran deeper. It wasn't just about one encounter, one neighborhood, or one man with a gun. It was about the countless others who never got the chance to stand tall, who never got to walk away. She made home that night, but unchanged, because she knew this was more than her story. It was a mirror of America's unfinished struggle, a story that echoed every time a life was threatened simply for existing in the wrong skin, in the wrong place, at the wrong time. The question left hanging wasn't whether justice would find him. It was whether the world would finally listen. How many more moments like this before change isn't just demanded, but delivered? If stories like this move you, help us shine a light on the truth by liking this video. It tells the world these voices matter. And if you believe more people need to hear stories like hers, subscribe and stand with us in making sure they're never forgotten.